Hello. I haven't made a video in well over a year now, and that's primarily because I moved out of my old studio space. I moved my stuff into storage for about 6 months whilst I was on the hunt for a new space. Eventually found the space I'm in now, moved in May of last year. It took about 3 or 4 months building up the space, doing all my wiring, hanging all my acoustic treatment, and obviously getting all the gear and furniture in. From then, it was a case of getting in some clients, working on various projects, and I really just didn't have a whole lot of free time up until now, where I'm a lot more settled in the new space, and now I have a bit of extra time where I'm hoping that I can get back to making some videos again. In this video, I wanted to give you a little tour. So when I was looking for a new studio space, I wanted a smaller space and I wanted a lower rental costs. I work in live sound as well. My primary source of income is from live sound work. And so really what I wanted from the recording side of things was to have more of a project studio rather than a full-on commercial space where I could pick and choose a bit more of the kind of projects that I wanted to work on and the artists that I wanted to work with. When it comes to recording and mixing work, really I just want to niche down a bit more and develop my sound and style as an engineer producer and have people coming to me because they want to work with me specifically, rather than just coming to me because I'm any other recording studio. I also, as anybody really wants from a studio, wanted a space that felt creative and productive. It is a small space, but it has a nice vibe. I like what I've managed to create here. I look around me and I feel inspired and motivated to work. It's a small, roughly 500 square foot space. So as you come in, you've got the main entryway to the studio, which also doubles up as a little storage area. I've got all my microphones, cables, DI boxes, mic stands. A lot of that is stored there. And then as you come in through the entryway, you've got the main live room. Then off the live room, you have a little vocal booth. And this is also where I have my upright piano and some of my guitar cabinets. Then off the back of the live room, there's a little kitchen area for if somebody wants to make some tea or coffee. There's a fridge and microwave for snacks and that sort of thing. This area also doubles up as a little workshop space. So I have a little workspace area where I can do like any soldering, electronics work, that kind of stuff. I've got all my various bits of spare cabling in there, connectors, all my tools. So that's a nice space to have. In a space this small, space is a premium, obviously. So I've really had to make use of the vertical height a lot in the studio, putting in a lot of shelving and just trying to create as much storage space as I can, because I do have quite a lot of kit in here. And at the back, behind the workshop / kitchen area, is a little toilet. Obviously essential in any studio, you need a toilet. And where I'm sat now is the main control room, the heart of any studio. In here, running through the general gist of my setup, I will gloss over certain things because otherwise this video would be 5 hours long. I'm running a Windows PC as my main computer rig. This is an i7 quad core with 32 gigs of RAM. It's a custom build that I put together probably about 8 years ago. It's still working just fine for me. I don't do any sort of soft synth, sample library, production heavy kind of work. I'm mostly tracking live musicians and live instruments. For my purposes, it still works just fine. It has enough power. When I'm running really heavy mix sessions, occasionally I do get to the limits of my CPU and RAM power. But for the most part, I can run 50 to 60 track sessions with multiple plugins on every channel, and it holds up just fine. So for the time being, I'm still going to be sticking with this computer, but I imagine eventually there will come a time that I want to upgrade. With my computer, I'm running Pro Tools, the latest version. No reason really. Pro Tools is just what I started learning on, so it's what I know and it's what I stuck with ever since. But I've used Cubase and Logic and Reaper, and I'll happily switch between any DAW. It's just Pro Tools is what I'm most comfortable with and know the most, and I do really like its editing features and just its overall workflow. It works well for me, but whatever works for you. As my main audio interface, I have an RME UFX3. I bought this when I moved into this studio space, as I really wanted to upgrade to something that hopefully was going to be the last interface that I'd ever buy, or at the very least just something that would last me the next 10 years or so and would have plenty of future expandability. RME are known for their excellent driver support, so interfaces that they released 10, 15 years ago they still make up-to-date drivers for. So that was a really great selling point for me. In addition to that, the conversion on their interfaces is top-notch. It's just very transparent, very clean, very high-quality conversion. I/O-wise, tons of expandability on the UFX3. So you have a MADI connection where I think you can expand to like an extra 120 ins and outs or something daft like that. I am running over MADI and SSL Alpha Link, which gives me an extra 24 ins and outs. Then I'm also running over ADAT. You've got 2 ADAT lines on the UFX3, and I'm using one of those just for a Focusrite Liquid Sapphire 56. I'm using it in standalone mode just for an extra 8 mic lines, mostly for talkback mics and more sort of throwaway lines like that. But in total, that gives me 42, 44 inputs, I think, mic line wise. And then I've got a ton of extra I/O for Outboard, and I can expand beyond what I have. So yeah, hopefully it's pretty future-proof, and I'm very happy with the overall sound of the interface. I love the Total Effects mixer. It's great for monitoring, and then also really, really good for Q mixes for headphones. And in addition to that, you have the Total Mix Effects remote iPad app. This thing runs on like pretty much any iPad, but I'm using 2 old iPad 2s. I have one in the main live room and one in the booth, and then that allows artists to independently control their own headphone mixes, which is an awesome feature to have built into an interface. You know, normally if you're going to buy a headphone Q system, whether it's setting up analog mixers with analog splits to your main multi-lines or something like the Behringer PowerPlay mixers, it's quite costly even on the cheaper end of things. So to have this as essentially like a free addition to your interface is awesome. I did have some issues initially with the UFX3 with audio dropouts, which I then found out kind of scouring the RME forums. The RME interfaces, the USB interfaces they make in general are extremely picky with what USB chipsets they like. If you're going to spend like over $2.5 grand on an interface like I did with the UFX3, you kind of expect it to work pretty flawlessly and be universally compatible with any USB chipset. There's a particular, I think it's Sonnet is the manufacturer, a USB PCI card that people recommended. I bought one of those. It was a little pricey, about £60, but then that solved the dropout issues. Otherwise, I'm very, very happy with my purchase. I'm running a variety of outboard mic preamps, some of my favorites being the Bart HRK, it's the MPQ something or other. They discontinued this unit not long after I purchased it, which was pretty annoying because I fell in love with it and I immediately wanted to buy more. It's just got a very clean, sort of open, three-dimensional sound to it. It's awesome as a vocal preamp, so I use it as my main vocal preamp all the time. It also has a color card feature, so DIY RE, they invented the color card format. They're these little PCB modules that you can install in a unit that uses color cards. They act as almost like little mini outboard units, so you'll get various compressor modules, EQ modules, all sorts of different things. In my Bart HRK preamp, I have a LA4, I think, style compressor, and then a German console, it's called, which is kind of like a saturation distortion type thing. I don't love the German console. When used subtly on some signals, it can add a bit of a nice flavor, but overall, I don't really kind of like the distortion that it imparts. The LA compressor, I love. I use that all the time when tracking vocals. It sounds great. I have a Yamaha MLA 8-channel rack preamp, which was a Facebook Marketplace purchase, interestingly, off a guy who, him and his brother, they used to run a broadcast studio van / truck, which actually was the truck that was Rack Studios, which, if you don't know, Rack Studios, very famous mobile recording studio that worked on Paul McCartney, Mull of Kintyre, I think some Donovan records, lots of cool stuff. So kind of a cool connection, even though this preamp I bought wouldn't have been something that Rack Studios would have had when it was Rack Studios. But yeah, very cool preamp. Sounds wicked on drums. I have a WA12 Mark II Warm Audio 500 series preamp in my 500 series rack. That's a wicked API style preamp. I really love the tone button on it. Sounds great on snare top and sounds great on guitar mics. I have two Neve 107.3 type preamps, the Golden Age Projects pre-73s, the Mark IIs, I think. I use those on overheads a lot. Would I buy these preamps again if I were to start over? Probably not. I'm not a huge fan of them. I don't dislike them either. They're nice preamps, but for me, I think there's better options out there for the money. I have a few Outboard reverb units, including the Behringer Rev 2496, which I actually made a whole video on this channel. A very interesting reverb unit that got discontinued not long after it hit the market. I think the story goes because Behringer were hit with a bunch of lawsuits because this thing was essentially ripping off a load of algorithms from famous reverb units. The build quality on it is pretty horrendous, but mine's still just about working, and the reverbs on it sound awesome, obviously because it's ripping off like a load of Lexicon reverb units and other famous hardware reverb units. There's tons of flexibility in the parameter control. You can really fine-tune reverbs and save your own presets, but yeah, you can get everything from huge lush sounding plates and halls to small room reverbs. It's just a really versatile unit that I use to this day in most of my mixes. I use it on drum reverbs a lot. I really like it for drum reverbs. The desk that I have in the studio, I custom built myself many years ago, and since that point it's been modified quite a lot since then and moved between various places a lot, so it's seen a lot of use. Originally, when I first built it, I had some Icon QCon control surfaces, so they were sunk into the desk, but eventually I got rid of those and replaced those with some touch screens as a kind of poor man's Slate Raven setup. And as you can see, I've got them kind of angled and it's all set up console style with my outboard rack to the right of the screens and then some rack space above. At some point I'd like to build this desk again, or maybe just modify this desk again, mainly because in this control room space is very tight. It's a small room and the desk just takes up too much space. I could make the desk shallower. I'd probably make it a bit smaller as well, less wide, and maybe get rid of the outboard rack bits at the top and move that outboard to the extra rack unit I have on the side. But it does look cool and is always something that impresses clients. I'd definitely say if you can get a nice looking kind of console style desk in your studio, whether you build it yourself or you buy something pre-made, it is a very nice addition just in terms of making your studio look legit. Some of the other stuff I have going on in the control room, I have a Focusrite liquid mix. It was discontinued, I think, at least 2 decades ago. The drivers, obviously, when it was discontinued, they've not been updated since. It just about still works with Windows 10 and 11. It doesn't work on Mac anymore. I'm using a FireWire PCI card in my PC just to run this thing. Whether I upgrade to a new computer that no longer has FireWire or just the drivers no longer work with newer Windows versions, at some point I'm going to have to say goodbye to this thing, which that day will be a sad day because I love it. It uses convolution technology and it models a bunch of famous hardware EQ and compressor units. It has some really nice sounding Neve EQs and SSL compressors, and I use it in pretty much every mix I do. I have kind of been trying to find plug-in replacements for the stuff that I use regularly on it in prep for saying goodbye to the liquid mix. Underneath my desk, I have a couple of rack trays with all my guitar pedals laid out on them, Velcro down in this rack tray, all cabled up, and they all run through an unbalanced patch bay. Of course, guitar signals being unbalanced, so it needs to be an unbalanced patch bay. Essentially what I can do is create any pedal chain I want. I used to have all my pedals just on a pedal board, and it was a pain anytime we wanted to use a particular pedal chain because of course you had to patch everything together, whereas this way everything is always set and ready to go. Every pedal runs through a one-spot power supply, so everything's powered up, ready to go. I can patch in any pedal chain I want. As well as that, there's an Outboard reamp box running into the patch bay, so I can patch guitar pedal chains into the reamp box, whether it's using pedals as essentially as outboard hardware running signals from my door, or if I wanted to reamp some guitars out to guitar cabinets in the live room or the booth. And then for the ultimate flexibility, I have a radial DI that also sits there in the rack trays, again hooked up to the patch bay so that I can be recording guitar with whatever pedal chain I want, but also split the signal and record a dry DI so that I have a dry DI track there when we're tracking guitars if I then decide to later reamp guitar again. To the right of my desk, I have another small desk set up, and this is kind of my video editing area. I have my M1 MacBook Air that I use for video editing with DaVinci Resolve, and next to that I've got my A10 Mini Pro ISO, which all the video cameras are hooked up to in the studio. Firstly, because I don't have a window through to the live room. Even if I did in here, because of the positioning of the control room, you wouldn't actually be able to see half of the live room. My desk is actually facing away from the party wall between the control room and the live room. And it's all brick walls in here, so it would be costly and expensive to fit in an acoustically transparent window. As well, in a rented place, is it really worth spending that money when you can just put in some TV screens and cameras and just have some video feeds between the live room and the control room. HDMI over Ethernet running to my A10 Mini Pro ISO, and then that's all running through the walls to the cameras, which are wall mounted on curtain poles, so they're clamped on with small rig clamps, and I can adjust the angle of the cameras, and it's all quite flexible. I can capture video for, say, video podcasts with the podcasting setup I have. Anything for YouTube videos, like the video I'm recording right now, I can just switch stuff on and it's ready to go. I might have to adjust camera angles a little bit, but it keeps stuff off the floor, keep stuff cabled up and ready to go. And I want to just be able to be focused on the creative aspects rather than spending too much time getting caught up in the technical. I have a little keyboard tray with a full-size semi-weighted MIDI keyboard for doing any MIDI work. My amp heads, I only have a handful of amp heads. If I ever end up having more guitar heads in the studios, I might invest in an actual proper switching system. But for now, what worked for me is I just built a little custom rack panel with NL4 connectors. Those all run to various sockets in both the booth and the live room, where I can essentially patch from different heads to different cabinets out in the live rooms. Of course, you have to make sure you switch stuff off before repatching, but that's not that big a deal. I have a Marshall JCM 900. That's probably my favorite guitar head that I own. Really great classic Marshall sound. I have an Ashdown Mag 250 for bass, which actually was originally a combo amp that I split into a separate cabinet and head, so the cabinet lives out in the live room and the head can live here in the control room. Having heads in the control room and then cabinets out in the live room, I can have guitar players sat here with me in the control room. I've always found it works well having the guitarist there with me in the room. It's just a nice, relaxed way of tracking guitars. I've also got a Carlsbro bass head, again, which originally was a combo. It's not that great, to be honest, but it just has a cool chorus effect on it. There's also a small Vox guitar head, again, which was a little practice combo amp. It's a little solid state head. If you really crank the volume, you can get some cool natural breakup, which just leads to some kind of fairly quirky tones. Monitoring wise in the studio, I'm running a set of Kali in 8 version 2s as my main monitors. My secondary monitors are a set of Alesis Monitor 1 Mark IIs, the passive version. I was using the Alesis monitors for many years, up until recently actually. For the longest time I never really felt the need to upgrade to anything better, and I still recommend them to people these days who are on a real budget. Usually a pair second hand with a power amp for them between £100 and £200 in the UK off somewhere like Facebook Marketplace or eBay. In my opinion, there's nothing else you can get at that price point that sounds as good as these do. They have a bit of a low mid bump, and they don't have the best high frequency transient response. The low mid bump sounded pleasing to my ears. The kind of lack of HF detail just meant that they weren't particularly fatiguing when working on them for long hours, and I just got to know them really well. I knew where they were lacking, I knew how they sounded in the rooms I was working in, always managed to get mixes that translated really well on them. I was interested in making the switch to a three-way monitor design, which was the main reason I decided to get the Callies. For the money, they're pretty exceptional for the price point. I don't think you can even get any other three-way monitor designs in that kind of price bracket, let alone anything that would sound as good as these do. Yes, so far I'm liking them a lot. I've not had them too long, but I've mixed a whole EP on them with a band I recorded recently, and I found, things were translating pretty well, and I found them pretty comfortable to listen on and not overly fatiguing working on for long periods of time, which is always an important thing for me. So moving on from the control room, in the live room, I have a variety of guitar combos set up in there, some of my bass cabinets. I have one of my drum kits set up pretty much all the time. It's a Yamaha Rydeen 5-piece, a pretty entry-level drum kit, but get some decent heads on it, and with the right tuning, it's a really good sounding kit. I've also got a fairly vintage Olympic kit from the late 80s, and that's a pretty cool sounding kit, although at the moment I need to get some fresh heads on it. Between those two kits, I can kind of cover a variety of sounds. I'd love to invest in a nice Gretsch kit. I've always really loved Gretsch kits, and I'd like to get a few different choice snare drums. Having a variety of snare drums makes a big difference to the kind of drum sounds you can achieve. So yeah, I have my drum kit set up most of the time, and yeah, I try to leave mics up on the kit a lot of the time as well. Even though I'll change things from session to session, it just gives me a good starting point and just saves on some setup time. If you're going to be recording all the time, unless certain stuff is in the way, leaving stands up and leaving stuff cabled in, it just saves you a lot of time. There's no point packing it down if you're just going to set things up pretty much in the same way the next time. I have my little podcasting area, so I have a table that I built myself. That was actually, the tabletop is from an old IKEA coffee table that we had at the old studio, and I took the top of that off, refinished it, used some legs from an old studio console, DIY table that I put together myself, just with things that I had, which, it's been the ethos kind of with this studio in a lot of ways. A lot of stuff came from the old studio with me, and I've repurposed a lot of things. A lot of the paneling you see behind me in the control room, there's various bits of pallet wood that I've used. Just really was a case of making use of what I had to hand, trying to spend minimal money. So yeah, in the live room, I have a couple of different patch panels that I built. I kind of have dedicated inputs where I've labeled everything up, where they're assigned. I try to have stuff set up in a way that I've got my drum lines on a particular patch panel, guitar lines wherever, everything's kind of hooked up and ready to go. I can change stuff if I want, but I've got a good starting point for everything, which just saves me a lot of time in the long run. Going into the vocal booth, it's a small booth, so floor space is minimal, and at first when I was recording vocals I was setting up mic stands in there, but sometimes for singers having a big mic stand in front of you can be a little bit imposing, so if you can get that out of the way and stuff off the floor and just make stuff look a bit tidier, that can often be really beneficial and just create a nicer vibe for any singer that you've got in your studio. So I nicked this idea off another YouTuber, True Sound Studios. He has some awesome videos on his channel. If you've not checked his videos out before, definitely check them out. Essentially what it is a upside down shelf bracket, and then off that a piece of wood, and you can tuck the mic out of the way when it's not in use and then pull it out when you are tracking some vocals, so it's always there and ready to go, but also you can keep it out of the way when you're not tracking any vocals, and it means that I pretty much always have a vocal mic set up and ready to go, again saving me a lot of time. And then I have an iPad for the Total Mix Effects remote app, so that singers or whoever's recording in the booth can adjust their headphone levels. And then I also have the same in the main live room, another iPad setup by drum position, so the drummer can tweak his headphone levels quite easily. At the back of the booth, I've got a little desk surface area that I set up and a desk chair. The idea there was recording voice artists. Being sat down at a desk area can be a bit more of a comfortable set up for a voice artist. With the monitor that's set up in there for people seeing me in the control room, I can also switch that so that I can show whatever's on the control room PC. So if I was needing to show video footage for ADR work or just show a voice artist the Pro Tools feed for cue points or whatever, I can show that in there. And that pretty much covers it for the studio. It was a long process moving in here. When I moved out of my storage, I had to get stuff out pretty immediately. And in an ideal world, when I moved into this space, I would have moved stuff in gradually. So I could have got acoustic treatment hung first, got the space treated, then started moving gear in and furniture and done stuff bit by bit. There was essentially no space to be able to work around to actually set the space up. So yeah, it was chaos for quite a few months where I had barely any space to move and I was drilling into walls with just enough space around me to be able to work. Yeah, I got there in the end with things. I'm really happy with how the space has turned out so far. There's a sense of accomplishment and achievement that comes from building your own space and it being more on the DIY side. If I'd just thrown a load of money at things, whether it was paying people to do stuff for me, it certainly would have been easier. And don't get me wrong, if I had the money, I probably would do it that way. And I could also get people to do things better than I possibly could, especially in terms of woodworking and stuff like that. But yeah, there's a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction knowing that it's all your hard work, your own hard work, that has brought it to life. I would encourage anyone who's wanting to go down this kind of road, setting up their own studio or doing anything similar. It's always good to be mindful and to be cautious and to be practical and realistic about things. But at the same time, don't hold yourself back. You know, if there's something you want to try your hand at or, you know, some dream that you want to realize, go for it. You never know where things are going to lead. It's better for something to not work out knowing that you tried rather than having never got off the ground at all. So I hope you enjoyed this studio tour, and I will see you guys again in the next video.